I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. The 2026 Maryland General Assembly session starts next week, January 14th. Because the state has a short 90-day annual legislative session, the 3 months, January through mid-April, are a whirlwind every year. This year, the state faces several challenges, but most dramatically, a $1.4 billion projected budget deficit, which has to be filled given that no state or local government can run actual budget deficits. That's only for the feds. 2026 is an election year, and Governor Wes Moore, who will propose a new budget the following week, has already said no to new taxes. Will he be able to keep that promise? At what cost? What will he cut instead? Will the legislature accept those cuts, especially now that the House of Delegates has inaugurated a new, more progressive speaker, Jocelyn Pena-Melnick? I asked Senator Brian Feldman and Delegate Mark Corman, both Montgomery County legislators and well-established committee chairs in the General Assembly, what they are seeing from their particular purchase. Senator Feldman chairs the EE Committee, Environment, Energy, and Education, and is a core member of the state Senate leadership. Delegate Corman chairs the Environment and Transportation Committee in the House of Delegates, and one of the two carryover committee chairs from the speakership of Adrian Jones. This year, Environment and Transportation also gets the energy portfolio, which used to be with the Economic Matters Committee before. Stay with us.
Walked this road about 1,000 times. You think by now I would have got it right. Broken pieces to pick up again. Cycle back to where we began. But I love the high. Coming home to you every time.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Montgomery County native and now DC-based singer-songwriter Kara Levchenko's two new single releases, I Don't Mind and Tell Me What You Want. You can find her and her music at karalevchenko.com.
Suffocating, but I love the high. Coming home to you every time. Like a moth drawn to a flame.
Senator Brian Feldman, Delegate Mark Corman, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting us both back.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Repeat customers.
Thank you. From your points of view, what are the key issues you are looking at for the 2026 General Assembly session?
We do have a budget shortfall that we're going to have to deal with. So I think that's number one. That's, again, constitutionally required. The House has undergone a facelift. I think that may be an understatement in terms of different committee chairs, jurisdictional changes. And I'm still trying to get a handle on the various jurisdictional changes. There's now going to be a seventh committee. 5 of the previous 6 committees, standing committees, I had bills with The only committee that we didn't share legislation with in the last the three sessions was the Judiciary Committee. And then I think we're going to continue to deal with how do we respond, or do we respond to changes in DC at the federal level? Obviously, impacts on the federal workforce, healthcare issues. Everybody in the General Assembly and also our statewide office holders are up for re-election. My own committee is Energy, Environment, Education Policy, K through 12 higher ed. We're dealing to deal with data centers, affordable housing, election law.
If the budget's the top issue, that means public education is the top issue. That means healthcare is the top issue. That means public safety, transportation. That means all of these big spending areas are all on the table as we figure out how to balance the budget. In addition to all the issues Brian named, which was very comprehensive, I think another one that's going to come back as a significant issue is housing. This is actually one I will personally be spending less time with now because the jurisdiction of most housing issues has moved to the Economic Matters Committee. And we have gotten energy from the Economic Matters Committee. But I know the governor is planning an agenda once again around housing. He's been very aggressive, a big leader on housing issues. So I certainly expect significant legislation there around transit-oriented development, as well as some process questions around how we develop housing. And then in the Environment and Transportation Committee, which I continue to chair, safety is going to continue to be a big issue. We've taken a number of steps around automated enforcement, driver training, things like that to try to improve roadway safety. So, you follow this issue very closely. And as you know, the initial numbers for 2025 actually look very favorable compared to 2024, which were already a minor improvement from the 2023 number.
Could you address this issue of the House getting a facelift?
This is probably in the House, I think, the most significant change since 2003 when Speaker Bush took office and created the Health and Government Operations Committee. So, for years and years, we've had 6 standing committees in the House of Delegates, and she has added a 7th to try to basically, I think, do a few things. One is kind of smooth the workload across committees and make sure there's sort of a more even distribution of bills, and also bring a little bit more cohesiveness to the jurisdiction of the committees, right? So a lot of people, I think she heard from the members she was talking about running for speaker, that it made sense to have energy with the environment, right? And so she looked at a way to make that happen. I think she had her own view, being chair of the Health and Government Operations Committee, that health itself was such a huge issue that it kind of made sense to have a committee that was focused on that and not also worried about things like government procurement.
Senator, from your point of view, is there any substantive change coming from the fact that the presiding officer in the House has changed?
I guess I'm a little bit in a wait and see mindset to see how this all does play out, because you have a lot of new chairs with new topic areas, including a speaker who, we don't know where she is on certain issues. She's never had to take views on something like energy policy or even some of the education policy issues that we're dealing with in the blueprint and higher ed and things of that nature. So I'll be super curious to see. I am optimistic. These were all good changes, but I think I have to take a bit of a wait and see approach to see how that all shakes out.
A ton of excitement about Speaker Penny Melnick for a lot of reasons. Obviously, she represents a very different demographic than we've had leading the chamber previously. Amazing healthcare experience. I think you're going to see healthcare grow as an issue of prominence in the House as a result of her, background. But I'll just say for us 3 folks from the DC suburbs here, it's really exciting to have a presiding officer from the DC suburbs. Senator Feldman and I spend a lot of time advocating for funding and support for the metro system. Well, wow, how great is it to have a speaker who has metro stations in her district?
But does that also mean that parts of the state that she doesn't represent may feel left out?
I mean, I don't think so. I'm not saying that I felt left out by, Speaker Bush being from Anne Arundel County and not from Montgomery or Prince George's County. It's just a different perspective.
I sure hope it doesn't work that way, because, the Montgomery County, we haven't had a presiding officer from Montgomery County, either the House or the Senate. I don't know, Mark, you're a historian here. What is it, a century?
Fairly certain President Ferguson grew up in Montgomery County.
Yeah, well, okay, sure. That counts, I guess.
Well, I think he changed allegiance, right? I want to talk about the budget. The governor has said that he wants no new taxes, but, there is a hole now. What do you think of the hole? And I'm asking particularly because while both the Department of Legislative Services and the Board of Revenue have projected significant shortfalls for when they are reporting real numbers, actual numbers, they are showing higher than expected numbers. So are you going to have to do taxes? Where are the cuts going to be?
Why did the real numbers come in a little bit better than the estimates? In part, it's because we're very cautious with our estimates, right? We estimate very cautiously in the state of Maryland, always have, and then really stepped up that caution when the current president took office. I think we've known for a number of years that we were going to have budget challenges, really going back almost to the Great Recession. We've had projected budget deficits, and then we've tried to do some big things that have furthered that. We had a COVID sugar rush that helped for a little while, but we sort of always knew that was going to come to an end eventually. We socked all that money away in the Blueprint Fund and have been spending that down on our public education programs. I think what's happened this year that was not quite what we expected is two things. One, the immediate impacts of the federal reconciliation bill have hit our tax revenues in very wonky ways that are leading to a reduction of how much money the state of Maryland is expected to collect in tax revenues. So just collecting less than we were expecting because of federal changes that happened after we adjourned last session, right? So those are not things that we could have totally predicted. One example, the way the federal tax changes were done incentivized more Marylanders to itemize their tax returns. And when they itemize their federal tax returns, we are linked. Your federal and state tax returns are linked. So you have to itemize at the state level as well, instead of just taking the standard deduction. That has the effect of bringing in less revenue than if more people were taking the standard deduction. And the other thing that I think was not expected, that is in some ways more concerning because we have more control over it, is that many of our state agencies are coming in for very significant deficiency appropriations. I mean, they've gotten to the end of the fiscal year and they've said, actually, we spent more money than we thought we were going to, and so we need you to cover that bill. And that's problematic for a lot of reasons and something we're going to need to get our arms around. We just cannot have agencies telling us our budget's going to be 50 and then coming back 12 months later and saying, actually, our budget was 75. And so those are the two big drivers of our immediate problem this coming legislative session. I do think this will be more of a session of cutting and belt tightening than it will be any kind of revenue.
Both the governor and the presiding officers have taken tax increases off the table in an election year. I think that's so the belt tightening narrative, I think, is absolutely accurate. But we are in a little bit of a difficult spot on a lot of other fronts. We've got to jumpstart the economy, but we don't have really the resources to invest in the kinds of things that will grow the pie. I mean, our longer term challenges are real here. Because if we do nothing, this $1.5 billion shortfall can easily balloon to $3 billion by 2028 fiscal year, and 2030, $4 billion. And so I think we have to be mindful of our stagnant economy and what can we do to change that paradigm.
The governor and the state leadership, you all have hung your hat on this idea of economic growth. And you also saying that you don't have the resources to make those investments. So what levers do you think exist to bring about economic growth in these conditions?
The governor has identified areas where we do still have upside economic potential. We've got AstraZeneca coming into Montgomery County, into Frederick with a $2 billion investment. Why? Because we still have, a life sciences sector here that has a lot of upside potential. We have not really been smart about how do we take some of the investment dollars and research grant money. We have NIH, notwithstanding all the cuts. So there's some areas, aerospace, clean energy is another area. We've got some companies in the clean energy space that I've taken my committee on some site visits there, Ion Storage in Beltsville. These are companies on the cutting edge of some breakthrough technologies that are going to change the country.
In addition to those industries, I think we just need to generally kind of look at some of our processes to make it a little bit easier to do business. And I think the governor has led the way on this with an executive order setting up a permitting council to try to basically reduce some of the permitting burden. We're actually going to be having a hearing early in session in my committee with some of the state agencies that we have the most oversight over and how they do permitting to try to make things work a little bit smoother. That includes the Department of Natural Resources, Maryland Department of Environment, Maryland Department of Transportation, all of which, if you're doing different kinds of projects in the state, might have permitting requirements. I've worked the last couple of years on franchising law in Maryland, the ability of franchisors and franchisees to do business in Maryland, right? This is when, someone has an idea for a business, and instead of opening up site number 2 themselves, they sell the idea for site number 2, site number 3, site number 4, right? Marriott is actually a franchise model that's based in Maryland. And so we have, unfortunately, some of the most restrictive laws on the ability of franchisors and franchisees to do business that we can do some reforms on. We had a little bit of success last session. Now, is that change itself going to, move us from, the 40s of business development in the country to number one? No, of course not. But we need to do a lot of different things. It's not going to be one thing. And I will say that while we have many headwinds from the federal government, I would still rather be in a county and a state that has the National Institutes of Health, that has the Food and Drug Administration, that has the National Institute of Science and Technology, than doesn't have these things.
The problem is that we talk sometimes in such generalities that we often can't figure out the things that actually are going to make a difference. Take clean energy, for instance. Even if you are successful in what you are trying to do, scaling up to a number where it actually mitigates the impact that you're seeing from DC in any real way is hard to imagine.
Our PJM grid operator, that operates our 67 million customers, we've got 13 states plus DC, they had a backup of 2 years in a queue of clean energy projects that, have been approved through the queue, but they can't find siting or permitting is the main problem. Moody's identified Maryland, the little state of Maryland, as 50th in the nation is the worst place when it comes to siting and permitting for energy projects. And we did pass a bill this past year called the Renewable Energy Certainty Act, Regulatory Certainty Act. And so removing some of these regulatory hurdles, permitting problems, zoning, local zoning, are things that will pay, and reap dividends starting in 2029 when hopefully we have a different president and a different Congress.
And in January, the Public Service Commission is going to be doing a procurement on storage based on legislation Chair Feldman helped push through last year, the Next Generation Energy Act. And actually, Senator Feldman and I, before he was the chair, had legislation on battery storage pilots in the state of Maryland. So we've learned a lot from those pilots that are hopefully going to allow us to scale up with this new procurement.
And the governor had a nuclear energy bill. It's going to be in your committees. Are we going to look at nuclear energy more seriously this year?
Everybody wants to talk small modular reactors and the like, and I myself chair a national task force on this subject at NCSL, and we had 2 days of hearings last month, and this issue is hot around the country. Nuclear's made a huge political comeback. Many, I would say, if not most of the environmental groups now acknowledge nuclear is going to be part of the future. The key is the technology is still, for particularly small modular reactors, 6-7 years out. And even then, the economics of it are a bit tricky. But we did pass a bill to incentivize new nuclear, but we're not there yet. The timeline to approve nuclear projects is still long, and the technology of the small modular reactors are not quite there yet. And so I think this is more of a near or longer term future.
The PSC does not have any upcoming application on the nuclear side. The applications, even on the battery storage side, are few and far between. When there are other issues, I think that have to be tackled.
There's been an aversion from the environmental community to natural gas. I think we open up. I think we're in an all hands on deck kind of mindset now in Maryland, which has not always been the case previous to this last session or two. But I think this topic of in-state generation, the need for more in-state generation.
You just said something about there not being storage applications, and there literally just was one as part of the generation procurement streamlining proceeding. The Public Service Commission decided just before the new year that the storage application component was not eligible for the streamlining. That's actually okay, because actually storage doesn't require a certificate of public convenience and necessity. So they actually don't even need that streamlining. And again, starting in January, there's going to be a storage-specific procurement. So I think you're going to see lots of responses to that. So I think there's a ton of opportunity on storage. I personally, for many years, have had mixed views on the question of nuclear, but it's clearly a part of our energy budget now, right? It's actually a very significant part. I think over 20% comes from Calvert Cliffs in Southern Maryland. I've toured that site. It's obviously very impressive. The type of nuclear most people are talking about is not a new Calvert Cliffs. It's those small modular reactors. I think a lot of it depends on what kind of incentives you're talking about. So if you're talking about making nuclear part of the renewable portfolio standard and saying we're going to do nuclear instead of solar and wind, that's less appealing to me. But if you're going to say and acknowledge the reality that nuclear is part of our energy budget now, well, that's simple facts. That's already the case. And so we definitely want to keep what we have and find, ways that make sense to expand it. You mentioned a governor's bill. I was not involved in the energy bills very closely last legislative session. I will be this legislative session. And I know that he has legislation forthcoming. I don't know if it includes nuclear. I haven't, talked to him about that yet, but obviously we'll give whatever he presents a fair hearing. But I think it really depends on what is being asked. If you're asking to, acknowledge the reality of today, which is that nuclear is part of our energy budget and a relatively clean part of our energy budget, I think, broad consensus there. If you're looking for a major subsidy of taxpayer, ratepayer dollars, then it gets more complicated. If you're looking to do nuclear instead of other types of energy options that people view as greener or more renewable, that gets a little bit more complicated also. But I think most people who look at this fairly acknowledge that nuclear is and will continue to be a part of our state's, energy mix.
And where are you on natural gas?
Well, it's powering a good chunk of my neighborhood right now. So, again, I think we have to acknowledge what the reality is around us, which is that we have a huge reliance and will continue to have a huge reliance on natural gas in the future. But then the question is, what do we want to prioritize from a policy perspective? What do we want to subsidize, right? Do we want to continue to spend money subsidizing new natural gas? And I think that's sort of less obvious to me. Why would we want to do that? If we're going to be spending ratepayer or taxpayer dollars on energy options, why would we look backwards when we can look forwards?
Another takeaway right now is whatever we do, and this is particularly germane to data centers, however we do these things, I think the first and foremost issue is protecting our ratepayers. And so, like, for example, one of the issues that we're going to have bills this session, it's going to be in Chair Corman's. Do we let the utilities get back in the game of energy generation? Okay, they're going to make a play with legislation to do that. Anytime you start bringing the utilities into the mix, the question is, who's bearing the risk of overbuilding and we not use it? Is everything going to let you get stuck on ratepayers? Same thing with data centers. Who's paying for the infrastructure? And so I would say the same thing here. One of the differences between the United States when it comes to nuclear, I went and toured with this task force nuclear power plants around France. 75% of the power in France is nuclear. But the difference is that, the national government is backstopping it. Now, that is an area that the Trump administration likes. They don't like offshore wind for sure. They don't like solar. One thing they do like is nuclear. And so one thing there, particularly if it's in collaboration with some other states in the PJM grid and with some collaboration with the federal government, this is one where maybe the feds can help us out with federal largesse.
Do you both agree that we should have bring your own generation for data centers then?
Well, I will say yes. There are 12 proposals that have been percolating at PJM, and the PJM process requires that those proposals have to go to FERC.
Well, PJM rejected those proposals.
They didn't get their two-thirds majority vote. I think the data centers of our world, your Amazons, your Googles, et cetera, and this is true of 3 Mile Island, it's true of other places, they're going to have to pay up. If they want to operate and bring a data center, and I think that's part of the equation as well. So
I don't doubt it. I just want to know how you want to do that, because PJM...
Yes, I think they should bring their own energy and they should pay a tariff or a tax.
But how are you going to make them?
Well, we tasked the Public Service Commission and the utilities this year in the bill that we did pass this session with coming up with a tariff schedule. But I will say this, we've talked this interim, I've had meetings with the Ohio regulators, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and there seems to be a coalescing around some best practices amongst the states who are really trying to entice data centers.
So it is in the Next Generation Energy Act that went through Chair Feldman's committee last year. There is a requirement for the PSC to take some action on this. Yes, if we're going to have data centers, which is frankly a very big if to me, I think we really do not have a great handle on the upsides and downsides. I'm sorry that bill was vetoed, but we did override the veto. The report's due later this year, so hopefully we'll get some good information and data out of that. And two, they certainly can't be siphoning off existing energy resources, which is an idea I have heard. I have heard this idea of them being co-located sort of behind the gate at generation that we are currently counting on for our grid. That's also a huge problem, right? That we can't allow.
We are not exactly fast tracking data centers in Maryland. we only have a total of 44 data centers, generally small throughout the state of Maryland, only like two basically in Montgomery County. The reality is there are 670 in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So, and we're going to study it. Mark talked about a study, University of Maryland, and business school, environmental groups. So we are taking a slow approach. We are not Virginia.
You are both looking at one particular hole in the budget in the House. Mark, you're looking at the Transportation Trust Fund, and on the Senate side, there is the blueprint that is going to have a hole. What are you thinking about in terms of filling those particular holes?
Well, I can start on transportation. Transportation actually doesn't have a hole, right? So we have a lot of unfunded desires, right? But if you actually look at the transportation budget, we made some tough decisions over the last 2 years, and that budget is, at least as it came in its draft form in early September, is about what we expected. Some parts of the revenue pie are up a little bit more than we thought. Some were down a little bit more than we thought, but it basically balanced out to about what we expected. But it's not a projected hole the way we are projecting a hole with the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, right? Where when we get to 3 years from now, there's not enough money to do the things that we said we were going to do.
At this moment, Key Bridge reconstruction secure?
So the Key Bridge, of course, is not expected to be funded by the state. It's expected to be funded by the feds. That is federal law. I'm not sure the people in charge of the federal government right now care so much about federal law, but if federal law is to be followed, that money would come from the federal government. Of course, if the federal government doesn't come through, the Key Bridge is part of our toll authority. It was a toll road, as you know, part of the Maryland Transportation Authority. And so if it was necessary for the state to put in more resources, the first place to go for that is the toll authority.
The governor's going to get his first crack at the budget. Last year, when it came to the blueprint, he immediately started pushing for some delays in what they call the collaborative time component of this year. Again, I'm eager to see what the governor puts on the table. These are big dollars that we're going to be throwing towards K through 12 education. I mean, I took my committee this interim to a group of community schools in Prince George's County that I honestly didn't know that much about what community schools even do. But I know that there are folks that think that there's a lot of largesse directed at community schools, special ed. I mean, it's endless. So I'm probably going to have to first see, and this is going to be a joint endeavor between my committee and our budget committee.
One other thing that has been on my mind is that Governor Moore's administration made a big point of filling staffing holes in agencies. Now that these budget difficulties have come up, those holes are not going to be filled, I would imagine, or they're going to be held. Are you concerned about the level of service from state government as a consequence?
Well, sure. If the federal model is any example, if you read about whether it's the Social Security system, the IRS, I mean, you can't get return phone calls for weeks at a time. I mean, that's, an example of when you've got state agencies, who ends up, the population suffers. You can't, get any proper services in a timely fashion. You can't get return phone calls. I think we should all be worried about that, but I don't envision that that's where we would go. But, again, we have to close these budget shortfalls in some way, shape, or form. But that would be unfortunate if that's where we look to solve the problem.
Yeah, but look, vacancy rates are way too high, but I think it's a little technical because the way to deal with the budget problem is not just to sort of hold vacancies vacant, but to actually maybe eliminate some of those positions that we don't need that have been long-term vacancies and then fill the ones we do need to keep the vacancy rate low. And I think, unfortunately, budget stress offers an opportunity at a time to do that, to say, okay, what positions do we really need? What positions don't we need? And then we want those positions we do need filled. I think the problem we were facing coming out of COVID is the positions that everyone agreed we needed were not filled, right? And so that's sort of aside from the budget question, right? We need teachers in schools, right? We need corrections officers in our corrections facilities. We need folks on snowplows in the winter on our state highways, right? So those are positions we know we need. And the vacancies that Governor Moore was going after when he got into office were a lot of those where they were just too high, and we need to sort of, bring those down. related question, but not exactly the same question, is just having less positions as part of the budget discussion.
Senator Brian Feldman, Delegate Mark Corman, thank you for taking the time. I hope you'll come back once the session starts again.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Find me in the crowd tonight, tongue-tied. Dance with me under cotton candy skies. We can leave the pain of the past behind, lean into the moment, dancing the night away. We can have whatever we want, start a renaissance. I could be a confidant, baby, won't you tell me what you want?
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics and government and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Montgomery County native and now DC-based singer-songwriter Kara Levchenko's 2 new single releases, I Don't Mind and Tell Me What You Want. You can find her and her music at karalevchenko.com. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Go to bed. We can watch all the colored lights again.